Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life Science Rundown. This is Nick Capman with the FDA Group. Before we jump into our discussion for today, just a little bit about the FDA Group. We help life science companies in the areas of quality assurance, regulatory affairs, clinical operations, commissioning, qualification, and validation, CMC, as well as pharmacovigilance. We offer three different engagement models, which are consulting, staff augmentation, and full-time employee recruitment. So if you ever find yourself in need, just head over to thefdagroup.com to check us out and get in touch. So today I'm speaking with Kimberly Wallbank. Hey, Kimberly.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining me today. I understand the topic for today is we're going to be talking about scorecards, scoreboards, dashboards, where quality departments are collecting information. And how are we best using it? Are we collecting the right metrics? Are we not? When we do collect metrics, how do we make decisions? Is that pretty accurate as to where we're going to be going today?
Yes, this is definitely something I'm seeing in industry that needs to have a discussion.
Okay, awesome. Well, before we jump into it, would you please introduce yourself?
So I've been in industry for 25 plus years. I've been an independent consultant with Quality System Services for going on 14 years now. I've worked with companies in either implementing their quality system, remediating it, or even doing some audits with it. I've worked with larger consulting firms to help them with their staffing needs as well.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for that introduction. So, where would you like to start the conversation today?
So one of the things I'd like to talk about what, this data collecting for data collection sake. Uh, there is a gut reaction to upper management of we need to collect data. We need to show people above us or our shareholders numbers. We need to show where we're going, what we're doing. However, there's not a lot, in my opinion, there's not a lot of thought process or thinking going on about the data we're collecting and how it's going to be used when we create these dashboard scorecards and what does it mean to the team. And on top of it, this is usually the quality team putting this together. They should be thinking about continuous improvement, product development. What does that look like? And there's data out there that can be used in that way.
When it comes to this concept, this idea, what are the biggest issues?
The biggest issues are people are very focused on throughput. That's usually the first visceral gut reaction is throughput. They want to know how quickly we're closing deviations, how quickly we're getting through CAPAs, complaint handling, how quickly can we investigate product complaints, how quickly are we getting people trained, as opposed to thinking about the quality of those actions and why are these actions being driven? For example, why are you continuously getting the same type of deviation from the same part of your manufacturing process? And you may not know that because if you're not collecting the right data of the types of deviations, types of defects you're getting, you wouldn't know there's an issue.
Mm. So it
So
sounds,
instead of,
well, I was going to say, it sounds like where you're headed, and I'll let you continue, is a quality versus quantity issue.
yes,
Okay.
yes, absolutely. So a great example is I work with a lot of customers on their complaint handling. Um, and I've seen occasionally clients have data, collection data, monthly data for their dashboards or scorecards of uh, types of defects for their complaints. So it could be anywhere from, difficult to open blister pack on the pharma side to can't open or manipulate a medical device. And you'll see that that may be a top defect in their complaints. Well, they'll just show that data and move forward because management review, quality council, whatever business group is looking at this are more focused on, well, did you get them closed? As opposed to thinking, if I have 300 complaints in the last 4 months on difficult to open a blister pack, I should probably look at my blister packs. Why can't my customers open my blister packs? So, because if you fix that problem, those number of complaints go down. So this head count issue, this throughput issue almost relieves itself.
Mm.
It's almost like they're trying to look at the quantity and the data of how quickly it gets you to get through things which is like a symptom, as opposed to actually looking at the disease itself, which is what is actually causing these issues to occur in the first place.
Right. So I'm thinking about myself being a listener to this podcast, and bingo, Kimberly, I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm in these meetings. How do I influence the discussion around this? So say I'm looking at this and I'm saying, you know what? I know some of these metrics are just being collected for data's sake. I know that there's metrics that aren't being measured. How would a person like this kind of start a conversation and say, hey, I think we need to look at what we're collecting in terms of metrics?
That is a great question. My first take would be of looking at the data and start asking the why. I find that people respond better to having to think about a question as opposed to you pointing out the obvious.
Mm.
And I do that a lot with my clients as well, is why are you doing this? Why are you collecting how quickly you're closing CAPAs and their answer is, well, because management wants me to. Okay, well, what's their issue? Why are they having you collect that? And it's like, oh, well, it's just paper exercise. Okay, well, what about if you tweak that a little bit and said, if I look at how many CAPAs I have in training or on sterile operations, something like that, and say, well, this is where the big bucket is, and walk them through of, if we get rid of these buckets or reduce the amount in those buckets, the throughput will go through faster. Because it's now not just a paper exercise. I always find too is associating, and I know there's many quality talks on this, is associating quality with dollars. And when you come to something like deviations, CAPAs, and complaints, that's very easy to do. Because every time you have a deviation, that's more time you're spending with your product before it goes out the door and can be sold to your patient, sold to the pharmacy. Complaint handling is even more important because that's where the patient, the doctor, medical facility saw an issue that you did not see. And maybe because, your expertise, you're not going to find the issue that someone who is not in your world can find. But if they can't use the product, they're not going to buy it anymore. And I can give a great example. I suffer from migraines. And the migraine medication I need to take, as soon as I start getting that migraine, comes in a blister pack. I can't get it out of the blister pack unless I use a steak knife. So imagine having a migraine, splitting headache, and you're trying to get this pill out to get the headache to go away. I stopped using that medication and my doctor changed my medications.
Because of the blister pack.
Because of the blister pack. So one customer doing that with their doctor, the doctor's going to stop properly prescribing that medication. Those are dollars you are losing because you're not thinking about, I have 400 complaints on blister pack. Yeah, my 20, 30 something year olds on QC and manufacturing, they can open it just fine. But someone in their 40s or 50s with the splitting migraine can't. Okay, your people on your line aren't the ones getting the migraine. I'm the one getting the migraine. So associating that kind of stuff with the dollars makes sense. and explaining that way to upper management, because that's where they go, is the dollars, because they want to know
Mhm.
how quickly things can go through to reduce headcount, or to say what's wrong with the process, which again is valid. But if you keep having these large issues, you're just spinning your wheels.
Mhm. Yeah, so what heard you say in the beginning of that was asking why, right? So I almost saw the five whys coming out, and maybe doing that per metric to see, what's the center of this onion and what are we actually getting out of this? And every time I think about a metric that goes on a scorecard, I think that this is not. This should be a leading indicator. So this should not be something like a financial statement where I see how I did last quarter.
Correct.
It's more of a what is happening in real time that's going to allow me to make informed decisions so that before we get to the end of that time period, I'm able to pivot. Would you agree with that statement?
Oh, absolutely. And it's also helpful with resources, talking about pivoting to the right spot. If I find that I have an auto ejector that people can't, inject themselves with their medication, I want to put a team together, and, as someone who's been a quality manager, put a team together to figure out why this is happening. Because those are, expensive medications, and those, come with a hefty price. So if people aren't getting their medications, they're gonna find something else.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Um, and it also helps. There's a positive to doing this as well, is in the cost savings, is actually helping you during product development. So if you're seeing these things and you're showing this data from complaints, from deviations, from kappas, your design team, your R&D team can use some of this data to say, oh, wait a minute, we were thinking about using an autoinjector for a high blood pressure medication, but we're seeing that it's not working in that same age group.
Hmm.
Maybe we should stick with a pill. So instead of going through all of those iterations with the autoinjector, you may be able to use that data that you're seeing from your other products, or even other companies' products from, you can read endpoints or all these other online periodicals now, and see what's working and what's not, and actually save yourself time and money in R&D.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. I want to dig into that a little bit deeper, but before we do, I'm gonna take an adjacent turn and say something that I'm sure everybody has asked themselves, which is how many metrics should I be measuring? Right? We've seen, and usually it's too many as opposed to too few, but that is a burning question. So how do you respond to that?
I respond to starting off with two or three and working your way up from there. And I also suggest reevaluating on a regular basis, what metrics are you maintaining? So let's say, you have a situation where all your kappas are late. Okay. So yeah, you want to start tracking, you know, the life cycle of your kappa from when you open it to when you close it, and maybe some other things in the middle of it. But once you solve that problem, why are you still managing that metric?
Hmm.
Managing those five or six metrics. Maybe you whittle it down to one or two, just to keep kind of a finger on the pulse of it. But you don't need to keep measuring a problem that no longer exists.
Hmm. Right. And I think one of the things when I think about a scorecard is it's a living and breathing uh, thing, and it always needs to be updated and developed, right? Because the business that I'm running today and the issues that I'm having today is not going to be the same business, and it's not going to have the same issues, hopefully, in 2 years from now. So as the business is changing, the metrics should be changing, which means some should be removed and some should be added. So maybe before we figure out how to determine what to remove and what to add, what is the frequency that we should be looking at this and how do we look at it?
I would start off almost looking at it monthly, would be my recommendation. Typically, you look at your metrics on a monthly basis. Very rarely are there some that you look at weekly. And if you are, those are usually the smaller groups you're doing at the supervisory level. But as you're looking at them, you want to have that question in the background of, is this still a worthwhile metric to have? And it kind of goes to another point that kind of popped in as well while you were asking the question about, changing your business, your business evolves, is how easy is it to make the metrics? In other words, to collect this data and put it in a meaningful point to where the powers that be can understand it. Because it needs to be easy, because otherwise you have people doing nothing but collecting data and putting together this dashboard scorecard for everybody, for management. And I've seen that happen in companies where they literally hire somebody and that's all they do. So if you haven't thought about how your data gets collected or how your data is captured in your quality system, that's the first step, is figuring that out before you start creating what does that look like. Because the last thing you want to do is create more work when your goal of this is to figure out how to reduce the amount of work there is.
Right. Now, I will provide a different perspective on the frequency. So in my opinion and my experience in working with this, I think these metrics should be looked at weekly as opposed to monthly. And I think they should be reviewed on a quarterly basis. Now, what that means is not I'm right and you're wrong. It means there's different ways to look at it, right? So in some regards, people might feel more comfortable with Kimberly's perspective. In other organizations, they might say, I think Nick's seems a little bit more in line with kind of how I operate. One of the things that I've noticed about when it comes to metrics is you might come up with a really good metric, right? This is going to help me make informed decisions. But you know what the biggest barrier is? How am I going to collect this? And how much time does it take? And what is the workload I need to invest in order to get that metric out? Now, that becomes an issue in and of itself, because if it's very easy to get and it can make me get informed decisions, bingo, let's add it, right? However, if it is really difficult in order to collect that data so that I can make informed decisions, how useful is the metric? And if it's more difficult to collect than the value it's going to provide, then sometimes I might say that would be useful, but the amount of time and money required for me to get that information doesn't justify it. So how do you grapple with that?
Well, that's all risk-based. I mean, that's really what that is. In fact, I would add probably something else to that, is how long do you want to capture that metric? When I was a QA manager back when I worked for a large pharmaceutical company, I managed a team that reviewed and approved validation documents. And one of the things we were a very unique group in the sense of we had multiple customers. We had chemistry, we had microbiology, we had design labs. We also had the technology team, metrology, all these groups that fed us documents for review. And most of those teams were complaining their priorities weren't being met. We weren't getting reports through, whatever. But I was also hearing from my team when I was asking them, they go, we are constantly being interrupted. And it was like, okay, so I know this is going to be painful, but for the next 3 weeks, I want you to track your time. Okay, just track your time. And I made it as simple as possible, knowing that, again, anyone who tracks their time hates tracking their time. They feel micromanaged. They feel like you're telling them they're not providing value. And I told them, I said, the goal is for me to understand and take to upper management of these are all the interruptions we're having. I need data to prove this. Okay. And it will help me figure out how to address the issue. I said, I only want it for 3 weeks. So I put a time limit on it so that it wasn't something I was going to continue making them do. And it was very simple of we had director level people coming to them asking where they were in reviewing a 500-page report. Well, they had opened it an hour ago and had started it, and this was their fifth interruption. Every time they got interrupted, they had to go back to page one because they were interrupted. They didn't have a chance to say, let me stop and figure out where I am. Because it's a director, it's a senior director, or even a vice president coming up to you, as a QA reviewer, you tend to be like, yeah, you're coming to talk to me. This must be important. The amount of meetings that were happening, and some of them obviously were valuable. Like my team meeting, I purposely said, look, we're going to rearrange my team meeting to where we're getting stuff in and out of it. There's an agenda. If we do not have an agenda, we're canceling the meeting. So I went to upper management and said, look, these are the issues that we're seeing. And if I can reduce the interruptions by 30%, we can get our throughput higher. So my team, even though they hated collecting the data, I hated crunching the data. I found ways to hide them. I started setting up office hours in an empty conference room that almost no one knew about, and said, for 3 hours, reviewer A is going to sit in there and bang out that autoclave report without any interruptions. And at the same time, I set up with these directors who kept coming by saying, look, you're not going to get any different answer than you got an hour ago, because they would come before a meeting and then come right after the same meeting. And so I said, look, if it's that urgent of a priority, I'm happy to give you an update in the morning, an update at lunch, and an update at 5, with the understanding of you leave the reviewers alone. I will take that on. And when we implemented these things, don't get me wrong, there was a lot of pushback. We were at the point where I had people not working 12-hour days. They got down to an 8 to 10-hour day. And I had some people in that team with young children who actually got to go home on time. So it's one of those data sets where collecting the data can be difficult and frustrating. But I think also, if it's, like you said, if it's meaningful and you have an end goal at the end and you can set a duration to it, it ends up being valuable. But if there's none, that's when you're like, no, it's just not worth pursuing. And right. I think if upper management asks you to collect that kind of data, you then start showing to them that it's literally going to be adding work, which is going to add time, which is going to add cost.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. I have also gone through the time measurement thing. And the interesting thing is when you bring it up, there's what I've found is that there's a lot of defensiveness. Yes. You're for lack of a better phrase, taking off your clothes and showing your underwear, right? Like, why do you want this minute information? The interesting thing is that for a leader and a manager, when they're asking their employee their report in order to do this, it's primarily, if not the sole purpose, is to figure out collectively where is that time being wasted, right? Because certain things are going to jump out, right? So just a very simple example is me and my assistant went through this, right? And we use this 4-quadrant thing. So if you imagine 4 quadrants in the top left, it's what do I love to do that I'm great at? And then the next quadrant on the top right is what am I good at that I don't like to do? Below that is what do I not like to do but I'm good at? And then the bottom right is what don't I like and I'm bad at, right? So obviously you want to get rid of the bottom right and you want to focus on the top left. Well, one of the things that we found is that she was spending a lot of time managing my calendar, right? There was a lot of back and forth. And because my calendar was changing so much, she would say, "Hey, he's open at this day and time." And then as soon as they said, "Great," guess what happened? It's full. So now she's back, right? So a very simple fix to this was setting up Calendly, right? And that saved her a whole bunch of time and stress and frustration, and for the person on the other side that's having to respond, right? So just an example that when you go through an exercise like asking somebody to, now I did 3 days, not 3 weeks, but again, some people might like Kimberly's perspective, some people might like Nick's. It's really up to each individual. But you're gonna
But I
find, oh, go ahead.
but I think it also depends on that duration. I think it also depends on the type of problem you're solving.
Correct.
And I
Yes.
think, with your scenario, it was you and your assistant, which 3 days seems more than adequate. A group of 20 people trying to figure out how to manage it all. 3 weeks was a little bit more doable. So I think it all
Yeah.
depends on the scenario, the situation, the group you're in.
Right. Right. And I think one of the takeaways is where in this data set are we able to say, make decisions?
Right.
This is taking too much time, or there's too many interruptions, or whatever, so that we can focus on that and then make the corrections. Um, you you also kind of mentioned the concept of block time. And if somebody hasn't thought of that concept, I just wanted to throw it out there. If you leave your calendar open, it's open for everybody. So if you know I've got a project coming up, or every day I'm responsible for doing X, Y, and Z, block that time out on your calendar. And they can be overrode, right? So if somebody says, I really need that time, you can override it. But at least you won't have this constant battle of, oh my God, how am I going to get this done and give it the time and attention that it needs when people keep interrupting me or scheduling meetings?
No, I completely agree with that. And I think it also goes to how you respond when someone says, everyone can meet at this time except for Nick or except for Kimberly. And your answer should be of why this time? And it's, well, because A, B, and C. And if A, B, and C are valid, then be like, yes, I can move things around. I
Hmm.
can move that around, as opposed to telling them, oh, I blocked it off for myself to get stuff done. Once you say that to somebody, they assume your whole calendar's fair game.
Yeah.
I've learned that one the hard way. Yeah. So, but just saying, oh, well, we just prefer to have the meeting on Friday morning is not a really reasonable answer to scheduling a meeting Friday morning because people
Whatever.
don't want to be at their desk on Friday morning. Right.
Yeah. Um, so I wanted to get a little bit deeper into these metrics, right? Um, how would you, if you're thinking about the different scorecards, dashboards you've seen, um, what types of metrics should people be including? So you might, and right off the bat, I'm thinking quality versus quantity, right? So that might be a type. There might be other types. And what are some maybe more static examples of metrics that you think people in quality need to be including in their dashboard, if there are those types of metrics?
So the ones I think you absolutely need in there are the ones where there is a strict deadline to the agency. So anything from pharmacovigilance, where you're doing an MDR or a PDBMR or FAR, those need to be measured always.
Hmm.
Because if you do not meet that, that's a 483.
Hmm.
Okay, so that I think is non-negotiable. That one you need to do, you have to do. Anything where someone decided, right or wrong, to put a time period in a procedure. Um, a hard timeline saying all deviations must be closed in 20 business days or 30 calendar days. No exceptions. Okay. Measure that, but then once you start seeing you're not meeting it, understand why you put that time frame in your procedure, which is why that metric's good. And then if you change the time period to, let's say, 45 days, and you can have an extension. Okay, then you can change that metric, alter it, but at the same time, look at possibly eventually removing it once you start meeting it consistently. I think anytime looking at defects, I think that is very important. You want to see your top defects for your product. What are your customers complaining about from, is it, I can't use it, I can't get it out of the packaging. Or even from a pharmacovigilance standpoint, you're having an uptick in rashes, an uptake in nausea or something. Those things that are very customer focused, customer facing should always be there, and have a discussion of what do we want to do about these top three, top two. Are they at a range where, we need to take a look at it? Or are they just the top three because everything else was a one and we had twos and threes on these? What does that look like?
Yeah. That's great. One of the things we talked about and are in agreement on is metrics at certain points need to be removed, and then metrics need to be added that weren't already there. Is there a nice, quick, easy list of questions I can ask myself or my team when we're going through these metrics on a regularly scheduled basis, be it monthly, quarterly, annually, whatever, that I can go through those 3 to 5 questions and say, after these questions have been asked and answered, I know this one should be removed. And after asking these types of questions, that is leading me to understand that, okay, this new metric now needs to be included.
That is a great question. I personally have not formulated that beautiful standardized list, but some of the things I could think of is, what's the problem I want to solve? Or what problem do I think is actually there that needs to be solved? Because you may think there's a problem, but there's not really a problem. What are the customer facing items that we as a company need to be aware of to address? What are the metrics that we need to keep tabs of to prevent us from needing to do a recall or getting in trouble with the agency? Those are some of the big, broader questions. And then I would detail it down to, is this data we're currently collecting that I can easily create a metric for? Or is this something that now I have to create a whole other process to collect that data? I've seen, and the reason why that's important is in my head, I'm thinking of these computerized quality management systems where they get put together to do your deviations, your CAPAs, your complaints. And so you have all your pop-up fields with the drop-down list, and which is great. And those are data you can easily extract and create your metrics on. But there's a lot of times where people are like, oh, we have too many of those drop downs, we're just going to put it in the open text field. Well, not everyone puts things in open text the same way. And now management wants to analyze it. That's a lot of effort.
Yeah.
That is a lot of effort. I was actually on a consulting project where we actually had to go through and do that. And they're like, oh, we have an hour. You have an hour to get this data. And it's like, it's going to take us an hour to go through 4 records, much less to get the data you want because of this hour time period. So thinking those questions through. And I think also remember in triaging what these problems you think there are. Because you can't solve everything overnight.
Right.
And it may be that, addressing issues in your CAPAs are more important than addressing your issues in training. Or the other way around. Maybe you're having all these CAPAs because you're not adequately training your team.
Yeah.
So thinking through that and using these meetings like management review, quality council, whatever meeting you're doing these metrics in, going through and understanding and why,
Hmm.
and making sure the right people are in the room when you're having that discussion. I've sat in on many of those types of meetings where it's all director and above asking all these questions why, and just making decisions, and then bring it down to a manager or supervisor level. And they're like, okay, but for me to get you the data you just agreed to, I need to add 20 hours to my week or 20
Hmm.
hours to my team's week,
Right.
and so having that discussion with the right people, the right levels in the room is also very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Having the right people in the room so that, and we referenced this earlier, which is I can get you anything you need as long as I have an unlimited budget and time, right?
Right.
And
Absolutely.
what's the value based off of that investment? So having the right team members in is super important so that there aren't those gaps in understanding. Um, when we're creating a platform for entering these metrics, we have to make sure that they are um, quasi-rigid, because the whole point is to make decisions based off of reporting. And to your point, if these are open text boxes, I can't collate this information in order to take a look at the broader landscape so that I can make those decisions.
Correct.
So making sure that not only when you're setting up these metrics, but it's going to give you the output, which is a report that is accurate, meaningful, and something that I can use. So those were some of the challenges that I was thinking of. What are some more challenges or really important pieces of information we have yet not discussed?
And the why, making sure everyone understands why you're doing what you're doing. Uh, and I mean that from the entry level individual contributor all the way up to the site head. Why are you collecting this data, and what's the purpose of it, and how are you going to act on the data?
Hmm.
Because it's very easy for someone who is doing their job and all of a sudden they see a metric because they like to color code go from green to red or green to yellow and think, oh my God, my job's on the line,
Hmm.
when something else happened in the process. So it's a matter of what is the data going to be used and how are we going to act on it?
Hmm.
And what does those decisions look like? So I think having that discussion at all levels is absolutely critical, because the last thing you want is an individual contributor, a supervisor doing everything they can to meet timelines and then quality sacrifices.
Yeah, great point. Well, this has been a really great conversation. I think a lot of people listening are going to get a lot out of this. Before we close, what would you like to leave the audience with?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Nick, for giving me the opportunity to chat with you today. I really enjoyed it. But one thing is that don't do this alone. Don't, have talk to each other, hire a consultant, hire, a team of consultants to talk to you, even if it's just for an hour, to like, what does this mean? What does this measurement look like? How can I act on it?
Mm,
Um, before doing anything. Don't just sit at your desk saying, I need to measure this. Just to make upper management happy. That's never a good answer. Just to make upper management happy. I mean, ultimately, upper management will be happy if deviations go down, if kappas go down, if complaint numbers go down, costs go down.
hmm.
So that, I think, is the big takeaway.
Yeah, I love it. And I'll just compliment what you said, which is when I think about the, broad landscape of everything that we are responsible for, the dashboard, the scorecard is the most difficult. If anybody has read my book or wants to read my book, name is number one Amazon bestseller. you'll find that I do mention that this is the most difficult thing, because if you're really serious about getting the most out of it, it should be difficult, right? And I like to tell my team, and I think leaders and managers out there I would encourage them to subscribe to this concept, which is I don't um, I don't allow my team to speak up. I require them to. And that's one of the stories in the book that I talk about, which is I used to think the people that I reported to were dumb, for lack of a better word, right? What I realized is they weren't dumb. They just didn't have people like me feeling safe and comfortable speaking to them about other metrics that we should be measuring that would help them more. And we shouldn't be focusing on this. So, assuming you've got a good leadership and management team, speak up, engage in that discussion, and not only is it going to help the organization, but it's going to help you as well. So with that said, Kimberly, this was really awesome. I really appreciate the time and the insight. And to everybody listening, as always, if you find conversations like this valuable, please share it with a colleague or your professional network. If you haven't already, subscribe to get updates of new episodes at thefdagroup.com/podcast. And follow the FDA Group on LinkedIn. If you'd like to connect about project or resource needs, head over to thefdagroup.com to get in touch, or feel free to connect with me personally on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see y'all next time.